But let's move on to an op-ed in Pirate Wires, one of the greatest journalistic outlets in the world, run by Mike Solana. Last year's 2024 Journalist of the Year, Mike Solana. And he has an op-ed here from Mark Pincus, the founder of Zynga. He says, founders, leave Delaware while you still can. Its activist courts block founders from controlling their own companies. If you're a founder, run. Don't walk to a friendlier state. We've been seeing this with Tesla and Elon moving his companies to Texas. Zuck's thinking about going to Texas. There's a lot of people that are
there's a lot of Nevada.
And this piece kind of explains, how seriously you should take that. Let's read through some of it, and then I'll get your reaction, Jordy. He says, I experienced this firsthand at Zynga. Now the industry is starting to catch on. For the last century, Delaware has been the default incorporating place for businesses, with 66% of the Fortune 500 and 80% of 2024 IPOs being Delaware-based. Businesses incorporated in Delaware account for nearly a third of the state's revenue. Well, we will say it used to be a third. Delaware's primary draw, predictability. Its court of chancery is a non-jury trial court, meaning that chancellors, judges, who are experts in corporate law, decide cases unilaterally. The court's lack of juries and century of case law precedent are meant to give businesses a clear and consistent applied legal framework. But Delaware's reputation as the go-to state for incorporation has been eroding for the past few decades, starting with its 1985 Smith versus Van Gorkum decision, when it found that directors can be held personally liable for their decisions. And since former Legal Aid Society activist attorney Kathleen McCormick took over the court in 2021 after being appointed as chancellor, its rulings have been at times egregiously hostile to founders. It was McCormick who refused Tesla's board-approved attempt to reinstate Elon's $56 billion pay package, even after shareholders voted for it twice. And then that led Musk to reincorporate both Tesla and SpaceX in Texas, and Neuralink moved to Nevada. Chamath redirected incorporation of his last four companies to Nevada, and Ackman reincorporated Pershing Square in Nevada as well. TripAdvisor, TransPerfect, and Dell have all left. Brian Armstrong and Paul Grewal have recently railed against the state's activists as judges, and now Meta is planning on reincorporating in Texas. Why? Because at every turn, Delaware's activist court seems hell-bent on kneecapping founders, simply trying to do what they do best, build great companies and deliver value to shareholders. Jordy, what do you think?
That's insane. I didn't know about Dell. I didn't know about TripAdvisor. I didn't know about Pershing Square. Brian Armstrong seems like an obvious one. But the tide's already shifting, because like one of the issues is it actually matters quite a lot that, the new company formation moving away from Delaware, and like this is very easy, right? Stripe can at any point roll out Nevada incorporation, Texas incorporation. In fact, I need to check, but people don't really realize that these online incorporation tools already account for a very meaningful amount of incorporation. So obviously go to your lawyer and say, I want to incorporate a company in, Delaware or XYZ state. That's still possible. That will always be possible. But so much of formation activity is happening on LegalZoom, Stripe Atlas, and a number of other platforms. And so it's not hard for them to, they're already running, spending a bunch of money acquiring customers. And if they just start to divert those new companies to Texas and Nevada, that will have a huge impact over time. But an even bigger impact in the present is these billion-dollar companies that are, or asset managers that are saying, yeah, we're just going to move over. And so it doesn't seem like the original moat that Delaware had around case law and, not having sort of jury-based decisions on some of these issues seems to have eroded extremely quickly. And as soon as you have, the world's most famous entrepreneur in the present day, Elon Musk, starting to say like he's dealt with a ton of activist, judge issues, and he has one of the biggest audiences of the biggest audience of entrepreneurs in the whole world. Yeah. And I see this being something that Delaware probably has to react fairly quickly, or their state budget is going to be cut by a third or whatever the number actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating because when Elon did it, it was unclear if it's like, this is only the world's richest man's problem and it would never be a problem for a smaller company. And it's just an Elon thing. And so he's got to do this thing because he lives this bizarre life and is the CEO of 5 different companies and all this crazy stuff going on. But it seems like it is translating to the next generation of entrepreneurs, an order of magnitude down in terms of market cap or even higher in terms of Zuck. And Mark is saying, hey, this has been going on for a long time. And he shares this incredible anecdote. So if you don't know Mark, he founded Zynga. They had Farmville, this online gaming company. They were built on the back of Facebook. The company got really big. And he writes, no founder wants to take their company public, but when they do, while employees and investors are popping champagne, founders face a climb up Mount Everest while carrying a bunch of public investors on their back. And while founders finally succumb to IPO pressure, most realize that the only way their company will survive is by maintaining voting control. That's why Zynga went public in December 2011. We were forced to do so by a now changed SEC rule. That's probably the number of investors on the cap table. If you have too many investors on your cap table, you are forced to go public. Now there's ways to do roll-ups and all sorts of different things to aggregate those. Yeah. I think the Jobs Act changed that. But still, there's a lot of pressure. I held on to a separate class of super voting stock, Mark says, knowing that control would be critical to Zynga's long-term success. And if you think about the history of Zynga, a lot of people were like, oh, like it was this flash of the pan, but he's going to break down how it could have gone down differently if he had control, which I think is a very interesting counterfactual. So he says in April 2012, Facebook changed its newsfeed algorithm, which caused Zynga to lose a third of our players in a day. And so it used to be these insane growth hacks on Facebook, like Spotify, when they launched, whenever you were listening to something, it would just share that to Facebook automatically. Imagine the distribution. Stuff would just go viral like crazy. Instagram would automatically share to Twitter and automatically share to Facebook. Now, no one does that. You can't hack these social networks at all anymore. And so by June, Zynga's stock had dropped 50%. Soon after we were hit with lawsuits, companies almost always get sued after a big stock drop. There is, in fact, an entire industry of securities litigation firms that specialize in suing companies whenever their stock price drops significantly. Of course, because the stock goes down, this could be securities fraud. Where was the CEO acting in shareholder value?
They could just argue that the CEO is negligent. And if there's $100 million on the line, I'm sure oftentimes the companies just say, yeah, we're going to settle this because it's not worth a knockout, drag out, multi-year fight and distraction.
Yep. And so he says the lawsuits compounded the issues, but they weren't the real problem. The real issue was navigating the whims of the Delaware court. They wanted us to prove that all major decisions at Zynga were driven by our independent directors, board members who weren't affiliated with the company's management, executives, or major shareholders, because the court believed if independent directors approved a decision, it's more likely to align with shareholders. So despite being Zynga's largest shareholder, the lawsuits effectively sidelined me from key committees like compensation and M&A. So he couldn't buy companies anymore, couldn't decide the future of the company. The court also decided that directors I trusted and knew well could not be considered independent because they either owned too much stock or had past business dealings with me. Think about the big investors, the people on the board, the VCs. This led to the greatest missed opportunity of my career in late 2012. I had a handshake deal with the CEO of Supercell, a Finnish developer, which has created some of the most successful mobile games of all time, Clash of Clans, to buy the company for $400 million. My board rejected the deal. We want to see you manage what you've got first, they said. And when I asked my lawyer why I couldn't just use my voting control to push the deal through, he explained that to do so, I'd have to fire and replace my board, which would expose me to personal liability. Supercell went on to make $464 million in pre-tax profit the next year. Eventually, Tencent took a majority stake in the company for $10 billion. In effect, Delaware's Court of Chancery deprived our shareholders of something like a 21x return. At the time, we were also getting inbound acquisition offers, but I wasn't allowed to weigh in on them, even though I was the CEO and the biggest shareholder. Our lawyers kept repeating, the Delaware court just doesn't like founder control. Eventually, I converted my voting shares to common since I couldn't exercise my control anyway, and I hoped I could gain more influence over my board. The Delaware court began turning against founders in the 80s. Since then, a string of rulings have challenged founders and headstrong CEO control, concentrating even more power in the hands of independent directors at their expense. There's the Revlon case, which is very informative. A 1986 case involving Revlon found that when a company is for sale, directors must take the highest bid, even if its controller or founder is opposed. In 2005, a judge railed against the CEO of Disney for unilaterally hiring and firing an executive within the span of a year, saying he'd enthroned himself as the omnipotent and infallible monarch of his personal magic kingdom. And magic kingdoms in capitals, which I think is so funny. In 2010, when Craig Newmark tried to defend Craigslist against minority stakeholder eBay, which had just launched a competing classified site, Newmark tried a poison pill and staggered board strategy. The court ruled Newmark had acted against shareholder interest. In 2016, the same judge who presided over the Zynga disaster forced TransPerfect, a highly profitable language translation company, to sell against its founders' wishes because the two co-founders were caught in a governance dispute. The company hated the decision so much that it reincorporated in Nevada. And so he goes on to rail against Kathleen McCormick, says Delaware lawmakers are fighting back. And yeah.
I don't know if I've ever heard a story of a attempted M&A that within that short of time proved to just be the biggest missed opportunity. Imagine having the ability to buy a company for $400 million.
Yeah.
And then the next year put up more than that in net income, which is what Supercell did. I mean, that's just an insane situation. And just, you could imagine Zynga being a really big company today still. And so that's a situation where there's just, that example is very interesting and relevant because people could argue that Elon's pay package primarily harms Elon and not the other shareholders. But in this situation, every Zynga shareholder suffered because they couldn't complete this, deal.
Yeah. What is interesting is that Zynga eventually sold to Take-Two for $12 billion. It's a pretty good outcome, I guess. Although it did take an extra decade. And what's interesting is that I remember when I was researching Take-Two, a lot of the Take-Two shareholders were really upset about the Zynga deal because they thought it was kind of a dog of a company and they didn't think it was going to be that additive to Take-Two because of course Take-Two owns NBA 2K and then they also own GTA. And so if you think about the GTA Grand Theft Auto intellectual property, tons of ways to make that go further through mobile gaming and social gaming. But maybe they already owned a few mobile companies. Maybe it didn't make sense to pay $12 billion just to get a little bit more leverage on that.